So this is a talk about uncertainty and how actually it's not always what it seems. And especially in policy making, where there's a tendency always to treat uncertainty as if it's about risk, which means you can apply risk assessment. And what that means is that you assume that it's clear-cut what the different things are that might happen, good or bad, and that you can assign a probability to each thing that might happen to reflect how likely it is. And there are situations where that works quite well. In transport safety, for instance, that can be the case. But the problem is that's not always the case. There are plenty of other situations in which we aren't actually confident in assigning a probability to the different things that might happen. We may not be sure about them. For instance, the innovation may be new in biotech or in chemicals. We may have a new product, so we don't have experience that helps us to decide on a probability. Or that maybe the modelling that we might otherwise use, we're not so sure about that either, because the system is open or very complex. So in those situations, we face a condition of uncertainty. And basically what that means is that we cannot be sure about assigning single probabilities. Now, so far, that's actually quite controversial, because usually policymaking just proceeds as if we can assign probabilities, and it kind of denies uncertainty. But there is in fact another dimension to the problem, even deeper than that, which is that the dilemmas in policymaking are not just around how sure we are about probabilities, but also how much we agree about the different things that might happen in the first place. Do we think they're good or bad? We disagree on that. What do we actually mean by benefits or harms, the pros and cons of different strategies? There may be disagreements about that, which are nothing to do with what probabilities we might assign to them. They're deeper, about, in fact, how we think of the world, what we think of as a good life or as a good society, how we think it's fair to distribute the impacts or the benefits of different options. So those are all about ambiguity rather than uncertainty or risk, and that's a very important issue in its own right. And then we get situations where we have both dilemmas, where we really aren't sure what may happen in the world. We face the prospect of surprise. It's much less determinate even than ambiguity or uncertainty. And some of the most important environmental issues of our time have been of that kind, like for instance the ozone hole, where the chemicals were responsible for causing that problem. It wasn't the case that they were known to cause that problem, but we were too optimistic about the probabilities and got the probabilities wrong. It was just a downright surprise that they could even cause the problem in the first place. So where that occurs, where we don't know what we don't know, then we face the problem of ignorance. And as you see, there's really very different implications of these different kinds of aspects of incertitude. And so that's why it really matters what kind of meaning of uncertainty we have. And there's a tendency for policymaking always to treat every type of uncertainty as a risk problem and hit it with the risk assessment hammer. And it does this not because people are irrational in policymaking or stupid, it's because they're forced to do this by institutions, by liability law, by the remits of their organisation, by insurance policies. These kinds of institutions make decision makers overemphasise risk assessment tools. And what it means is that the consequences of the more difficult, trickier bits of uncertainty get left out of these assessments, and the consequences of that fall on society at large or the people who stand to be most immediately affected. And that's why it really matters what we actually mean by uncertainty, and we mustn't be led by over-optimism about tools like risk assessment, that they're more applicable than they actually are.